Oh crap, guys, we got a problem. The plants in my tank, they're stunted. They're not growing. What am I gonna do? Hello guys, welcome back to Fishbox Studio. I'm your host Taylor. Today we're going to be talking about the estimated index. What is it? What is it for? How can you use it? And what it can do for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. The estimated index is a method of plant fertilization developed by Dr. Tom Barr in the 1990s. The estimated index is based on a law of science called Liebig's Law of the Minimum. Now, Liebig's Law of the Minimum is, the best way to describe it is to imagine a wooden barrel of water. You know, the wooden barrel with the wooden slats in each one. Imagine a wooden barrel of water, and each wooden slat is the ingredient that you need for plants. It's each individual ingredient. Now, the tallest, you got the ones that you have abundance of, which are tall enough to hold the water to the top of the barrel, and then you might have one that's shorter because there's not much of it. Basically, Liebig's Law of the Minimum states that whatever ingredient is the least is what's going to limit the growth of your plant. So, picture that wooden barrel again. If, say, one slat is nitrate, one slat is potassium, the other slat is calcium. If calcium is lower than the other three ingredients, well, then what would happen? Well, the water would leak out of the barrel, right? So that calcium is the limiting ingredient. What this translates to is the estimated index is about taking all the ingredients and supplying an abundant supplies, almost even a bit of an overdose of each ingredient. So the only thing that limits your plant's growth is your light, potentially, or none of it. Now, as you can see, I got all these fertilizers up here, but before we get into that, let's talk about the kind of ingredients that you would need to grow just a basic plant. First, we have the macro ingredients. The macros are the ones that the plants need the most. They are the key ingredients, and they need more of them than the other ones. There are three macro ingredients. We have nitrogen, which is, in fish tank terms, fish poop or fish pee is ammonia in the water. It's converted to nitrite and then to nitrate. So nitrogen, that's the first key macro ingredient. The second macro ingredient is potassium. The third macro ingredient is phosphorus or phosphate. Phosphate can come from things like your fish foods. When you put in a fish food in it, a lot of them have some phosphorus inside them, and as they sit in the water and start to degrade in the water, or when the fish eats them and tears the flake or whatever apart, it can supply phosphorus, but not a lot. Some. So phosphorus. Those are the three big key ingredients. Now, you could also technically count calcium in there is another one, and magnesium in there as well. However, calcium and magnesium, they're usually not in fertilizers because calcium and magnesium, that makes up the pH of your tap water. And most people who use tap water already have some amount of calcium and magnesium in the tap or in the water already. So those are so we don't really count them in the big three of the macro ingredients, but they are technically a macro ingredient. So now let's talk about the micro ingredients. A micronutrient is something that the plants need, but they don't need an abundance amount of it. And depending on the plant, some plants don't really even need some micro ingredients in comparison to others. For example, iron. It's a pretty common micro ingredient, and it helps a lot when you got plants that are mostly red. However, there are other plants, many other plants out there, that really don't need as much iron as others do. And sometimes don't really need much of it at all. So I'm going to read some micro ingredients off this list because there's a lot of them, but let me name some major ones. We've got boron, iron, copper, manganese, zinc, and there's a bunch more, but those are just some. The estimated index, it is really popular because it supplies an abundance of nutrients and allows plants to grow like freaking crazy. However, it does have some cons. If your tank doesn't have enough plants in it, it can cause algae issues because you're putting in so much nutrients into the tank that maybe it's too much to the point that plants can't use all of it, and then you get algae in return. A good pro of the estimated index is it's flexible. Typically, we follow a ratio for the macronutrients, the big three. 5 or 3, but we'll just go with 5 to 1 to 1. So what's that? We will want, for every 5 ppm of nitrate that we're dosing, or nitrogen, we want to dose 1 ppm of phosphate and 1 ppm potassium. However, like I said, it's really flexible. You really don't have to obey that. That's just a general guideline. That is the estimated index. We're going to supply a bunch of nutrients so that there is nothing that the plants could ever run out of. Typically, with estimated index, there are multiple ways to accomplish this. We can use things like dry powders, like this, for example. This is a powder. This is the micro solution that I bought. See, it's nothing but powder. I don't know if you can see that, but it's nothing but powder. You can also do it with things like these. These are each nutrient pre-mixed in distilled water. There's a bunch of nutrients out there and combinations of nutrients. So let's start talking about each nutrient and how it comes so you can make a good decision of what ones you would need. First off, let's start with nitrogen. Now, nitrogen can come in many forms. These are from Greenleaf Aquatics. This is potassium nitrate, and this is calcium nitrate. Now, there is also another one called magnesium nitrate. Now, hold up, wait. Taylor, you said nitrogen would be in its individual form. You're right, I did. Whoops. So, unfortunately, having pure nitrogen in a powder form isn't very stable. So you got to have something like a carrier. In this case, it's potassium. So when you use nitrogen, you're putting in some potassium in there as well. Now, this doesn't really hurt much because you need potassium anyways. This one, it uses calcium as the carrier. So whenever I dose some nitrogen, I'm also adding some calcium. There's a third one called magnesium on nitrogen, which acts in the same way. The main ingredient is always nitrogen, but you're always going to have some potassium, maybe some calcium or magnesium with it. Next one we're going to talk about is, well, this is K, or potassium sulfate. This is basically just potassium. That's it. The other one, this is monopotassium phosphate. So this is phosphorus, but it's using potassium as a carrier. So you're still dosing some potassium to get the phosphorus in there. Once again, it's a powder. Here I have my micros. Now, for those that's technically all you really need. The last one we can talk about is calcium and magnesium. This is a GH booster. It's pure calcium and magnesium. Now, you don't need to use this necessarily. I use it because I do have some instances where I've used RO water, which is nothing, or my water in the winter gets really, really soft, so soft that my GH level is like below 3, and my tank shows calcium and magnesium deficiencies. That's when I use this kind of stuff. But for the most part, you don't really need to use this. So, how much does this kind of stuff cost? Well, let me tell you how much these costed me. I bought these from greenleafaquatics.com. Each one of these is £1 worth of powder, and this costed me $10 each. $10. Now, that might seem like a lot because you need at least 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. You need at least the big 3 in the micros, right? So that's $40. It's kind of a lot, huh? Well, not really. Want to know why? Is because a whole pound of this, for a big tank like this, according to this dosing chart they have down here, 3/4 of a teaspoon, 3 times a week. Now, a teaspoon and a whole pound, it's only like this much. This much. It's like teeny. This can last you a long, long time. Maybe even a couple of years or a year. That's why it's expensive at first, but in the long run, it can save you a lot of money. A lot of money. And the benefits about the estimative index and this kind of stuff is you don't run into plant deficiencies. So, how do we dose all this, Taylor? What do we do? Well, dosing it is actually a lot easier than you think. Like these guys, they have a little dosing chart in the back, for example. But the best way to explain it is this way. Estimated index, we dose every day, but not everything every day. We dose our macros on day 1, and then we dose the micros the next day, and then the macros, and then the micros. And why do we do this, Taylor? Well, things like iron in the micros, for example, this has a tendency to solidify and turn into a unusable form when dosed with the macros because of chemical reactions. When we dose the micros on the same day that we dose the macros, the iron turns into a solid white form that you might not even notice because it sinks at the bottom of the tank, even below the substrate, and then the plants can't use it. So that's why we alternate days. Now, you don't necessarily have to alternate days. Remember, the estimated index is flexible. We can just dose the macros in the morning and the micros at night. That works too. But for ease of use, I recommend Monday is micros, Tuesday is macros. Wednesday is micros, Thursday is macros. Now, most places will have a little dosing chart like this right here in the back. For example, for this, a 60 to 80 gallon tank, so a 75 gallon tank, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we dose 3/4 of a teaspoon of nitrogen, 3/16 of a teaspoon of potassium, 1/4 of a teaspoon of phosphorus, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of micros on Tuesdays, Thursday, and Saturday. Now the important part is, because we're dosing a large amount of nutrients in the tank, we're obviously going to have some nutrients left over at the end of the week. So it's very, very, very important and even critical that you do a 50% water change or more at the end of every week. So, for example, say we want to do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we dose macros. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we dose micros. Well, Sunday, we want to do our water change. And what that does is it resets the levels so that it never becomes too much fertilizers in the tank and cause algae. So, how does it work? Well, I've been using it for a while now. Now my tank doesn't show the results quite yet because it's still adapting and still growing. But let's see what happens in a month. I've only been doing this for about a week now. Let's see what the tank looks like from today in a month. So if you'd like, screenshot this tank right now and let's compare it in a month and see what the difference is, assuming nothing goes wrong. From here on out, any sort of problems we have with the tank, it cancels out any potential nutrient deficiency because we're supplying so much nutrients. There's only two possible things that can cause issues with your plants at that point. That's either your light. Either you have too much or too little, or it's your CO2. And according to Dr. Tom Barr, CO2 is the cause of almost 90% of issues with planted tanks using the estimated index. It could be that the CO2 isn't spreading around enough, or maybe there's not enough flow in one area, so the CO2 isn't getting there as well as other areas, or it could be that you don't have enough of it. So guys, that's the estimated index. Now, last part of this video is, how do we get the estimated index? These powders, say we don't want to be dumping in teaspoons of it in every day, and we want to get in and we want to take these and put them in something like an autodoser in liquid form. Well, you got two options. These are Nylock G elementals. These are basically the powders already in a liquid form. These are slightly more expensive than these. And trust me, you can buy the powders and do this for far cheaper than buying these. But if you're a beginner and unsure of yourself, these are a great option. Another thing you can do, this is distilled water. You can buy this at any grocery store for a couple bucks. What you want to do is you want to go to a place called RotalaButterfly.com. Okay? It's a calculator. And what they do is you tell it what you're dosing. You tell us the amount, the size of the bottle that you're using to put it in. You tell it what you're dosing, like micros. You tell it what your dose is every day, and it will spit out, you want maybe 25 grams in this 400 milliliter bottle or whatever. And you use the distilled water to mix it. You don't want to use tap water though. Tap water has things inside of it. And tap water, when mixed with certain things, it can get moldy and cause problems. Especially if you're just using an auto doser and the bottle is sitting inside the cabinet, out of sight, out of mind, you won't even know. That's why I recommend using distilled water, or you can also use something like a RO unit if you've got one. But distilled water is pretty cheap. You could even make your own solutions. You could even do the big three, the macros, in one bottle of water or whatever, with maybe a head pump to make it easy. And then you can put your micros in another one. Just once again, you don't want to mix them into one. That's bad. That's the estimated index. It's very, very helpful. It saves you a lot of money. And it's something that I've been wanting to share for a long time. I hope you guys found this video educational and helpful. Please do like and subscribe if you can. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. My name is Taylor from Fish Box Studio, and I'll catch you next time.